I'm going to introduce Ellie. Ellie has got over 10 years of experience in the experimentation industry. In that time, she's enabled businesses to ship experiments at scale and create more value from their experimentation programs. She's won Agency Experimenter of the Year, Financial Services Campaign of the Year, Experimentation Elite Awards for experimentation work at and Digital, and has been a finalist for the Experimentation Culture Awards. She was also recently listed as one of the top 20 must-know crows of 2022 by Experimentation. Wow, we got a lot of accolades and awards, Ellie. That's wonderful to see. So with that, we're going to pass over to Ellie and let her get things started.
You find yourself saying the word experimentation a lot.
Yes,
yeah.
A lot.
If I type the letter E on my phone, it just auto-completes the word experimentation. So thank you, Scott, for the great introduction. So today I'm going to be talking about bridging the discovery validation gap and avoiding a waste-producing machine. So I'll explain what this is soon, but I wanted to start with a quick quote. If you're not embarrassed by the first version of your product, you've launched too late. So that's Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, talking about how if you're launching when it looks almost complete, or you've got all those features in place and it looks like you've got everything valuable that you could possibly add, you're actually launching too late, and you should have been iterating a little bit sooner and starting validating with your customers a little bit sooner. So part one, a quick primer or reminder on discovery and validation. I don't want to teach anyone something that they already know, but I'm just going to start with certain assumptions about what people talk about when they say discovery and validation, because there's tons of literature on the internet now, and actually it's very easy for people to talk about the same thing and use different terms. So when I'm talking about discovery, this is the idea of product discovery that was originally developed in the 90s when companies built websites and digital products and spent a lot of time and money trying to convince customers to actually buy them, that kind of sales-led approach. But actually didn't spend that much time listening to them, and it led to a lot of waste. So very expensive failures of products, and products often made it to full release before their creators realized that people just didn't need them. And then in terms of some basic definitions of what people call discovery, so from the Maze product discovery course, it's the process of closely understanding what your users' problems and needs are. And then the nice one from Teresa Torres is distinguishing there from product discovery and product delivery, which is where you're actually building a product versus when you're actually working out what decisions need to be made about the product. And again, there are loads of product discovery sessions that are available both through the product makers community, but also have a look at Teresa Torres and that sort of thing. And this diagram on the right you might recognize is also from Teresa Torres. Some examples of discovery techniques. A lot of these you might use before you launch a product. So user research, user interviews, customer councils, market research, user testing, usability testing, diary studies, on-site feedback and surveys. So there's qualitative ones. There's loads more. That's not an exhaustive list. So feel free to go on usability.gov and look at all the other techniques that they've got listed there. Quantitative things like product analytics, heat maps and session recordings, incoming feedback. So this is things that you can run in before your product's in the hands of your customers. And then also we've got lots of frameworks that I think we're all aware of. So you can see here on the right, like all the different frameworks that we use in this space to try and think about the customer problem and how we frame up customer problems. And here's some examples of things on the right that you can look through as a list. They're a bit random in terms of the different resources, but things like the Maze Guide, there's quite a handy list of design thinking articles that Craig Sullivan has curated. There's a really lovely video by Sally Foote about using qualitative techniques and pre-launch techniques with physical and digital products. And then also, again, take a look at Product Board's Product Excellence site, which is great. Discovery will not tell you how to build a feature, product or service over another way of building that feature, product or service. It can predict the size of the prize or how much you might make, but it doesn't actually tell you the returns on your developed idea when it's actually been launched. It's necessary for generating ideas, evidence, lines of inquiry. It doesn't include deciding what to build in what order, when to build it and how to deliver it. So basically it doesn't create your roadmap and strategy for you, but it will tell you if both of those things were wrong or if you don't have your priorities set correctly for your chosen outcome. A quick primer on validation. The oldest and quickest but most costly form of validation is just launching something, but I wouldn't recommend that. However, it's a surprising number of products that use validation techniques in an incorrect way or simply use them to validate something they've already built. So do any of these scenarios sound familiar? The product teams build the product and ship it, then our user researcher does some late stage validation, and then we have another team who might run some A/B tests to optimize the experience further. Yeah, we do some A/B testing, but it's not a core capability we expect our product teams to have. We should ship the core of the product value, then optimize it with some small tests later. We did some prototypes and wrote a user research report about 6 months ago. I haven't done any user testing with the live site recently. We measured each metric before and after the launch, and we thought that was enough. So if any of those sound a little bit like a feature factory where teams are just focused on shipping stuff and then thinking about A/B testing or validating what worked and what didn't later, then you'd be right. Some examples of validation techniques were after you've launched something or while you're launching. So I would say, I should qualify that and say you can use some of these to roll out your idea as well as to validate it once it's rolled out. So some of the qualitative techniques, you would use those once they're already live on your site, like actually running user testing once something is physically in the hands of users, or you can use a feedback or on-site survey while it's being launched. The worst of all the ones, not just launch, I wouldn't recommend that one. Things like an alpha, beta, dog food, where you're actually letting a small scale of users into your feature to use. A little bit of landing page work as well. A/B testing and multivariate tests, fallback groups, percentage launch or percentage rollouts. You can also use heat maps, session recordings, etc., tied to the A/B testing variants that you're rolling something out with, or the holdout groups, so you know whether incoming feedback is coming from users who got the experience or didn't. There's some really good articles on the right here from Netflix Skyscanner, another one from Itamar Galad, which is where this diagram comes from. I really like his diagrams. He manages to explain stuff really well, so I'd really recommend checking that out. Validation is not creating the final version of your product or service, but rolling out a solution to a customer problem iteratively in a risk-free way. It's not a static set of methods. There are new techniques being created all the time. And it's not a strategy roadmap, but it's complementary with post-agile and agile frameworks for delivering products like EDD. Not all things found in discovery can be validated, and not all things found during validation could have been predicted by even the best discovery that you did in advance of working on the product. So the discovery validation gap. So one of the challenges with discovery is not trying to find problems that are known as well as unknown problems. So in this little diagram here that you might have seen before, where you plot awareness and knowledge, there are some important problems that you know about. So you know that something is an issue, and that's a fact that you've already discovered. Whereas there are certain types of knowledge that you don't know about and you haven't actually worked out what they are yet. So they're more of an unknown problem. And some of you might remember the George Bush known unknowns speech, etc. This is all about trying to find those customer problems that are unknown as well as the ones that are known about. So thinking about the known ones, you've already observed it in some way, so it's quite easy for you to find a direct line of inquiry to help you build and decide what to build in response to that line of inquiry, in response to that hypothesis. But for some unknown problems, you don't know about them yet. You haven't actually found them. You haven't discovered them, and you might not find them for some time. So you just have to be conscious that you haven't found certain things yet, but you will eventually need to find them. So you need to dive deeper into your data to be able to actually look at all the different types of customer evidence holistically. So that's one of the issues that comes from trying to do discovery on different types of customer problems. But also the theory of discovery and validation is, you know, we all think about the sort of service design theory, discovery where you're broadening, the discovery where you're narrowing. So you've broadened out to a bunch of different problems you could look at, then you narrow in on a specific problem. And then as you step into validation, you broaden again because you try and find something in the solution space, you're stepping into a broader range of solutions. And then you narrow again on the specific final solution that gets delivered. When in actual fact, a lot of people don't talk about two things. So one is risk versus reward. So actually for the profile for a given product or feature and our tolerance for risk. And then also thinking about real production costs. So the actual effort of shipping products, maintaining them, sustaining spaghetti code, etc. So here's an example for a team who do just launch. And so they go from ideating an idea to launching it to absolutely everyone. And there is this huge gap in the middle. They essentially have the potential to create enormous amounts of waste. And for this team, they're creating a scenario where every release feels like a one-way door. They get the reward of the positive impact features, but they could have found a better idea if they used discovery techniques, but they also get hit by the risk of the negative ones. Because we don't measure as we roll out and release, and we don't get the chance to iterate earlier either. So one-way doors are these decisions that you can't easily reverse, and they need to be done carefully. So this drives the sort of behaviors where people become really risk averse to releasing. or they create loads of documentation around their releases so that they can get the release right and they won't have to roll it back. Thinking about when you add in pre-launch discovery, but you're not actually validating during launch, you get these first 3 steps where you can do some research and you can dive into the customer problem more deeply before you release. But there's still a little bit of a gap there between what you've discovered and how you validate. And so although you might have a better idea, so you've increased the potential reward compared to the previous scenario, and you might have decreased the risk a little bit as well, because you potentially picked a better idea that's not quite as risky, but you haven't completely negated all the risk. And then if you think about a team who's actually done all the steps all the way through to actually rolling out to an ever bigger group of users and actually validating during their post-launch phase, they managed to reduce their risk a load, but they also managed to boost their reward. There's been quite a lot of articles that some of you will have seen on LinkedIn recently about risk versus reward and experimentation, and this is just like a slight adaptation of some of those. But you can see that you're getting the boost and the benefit of the reward and then negating the risk. And actually it means that even if it costs you a little bit more in terms of production to roll something out in a validated way, you're actually saving yourself a lot of issues because you can roll that risky idea back very easily, or you can actually iterate it before rolling it out again. And it actually means you've not wasted all of your production effort trying to get something out the door. And then another thing to think about is how much risk decreases when you validate with larger scales and volumes. So at the top left, a really high risk thing to do would be to use a test with 2 or 3 people and then just immediately roll out. At the far end, using a percentage rollout where you're actually rolling out to an ever bigger group of users and you actually eventually reach everybody. Because you can reach more users and the scale of that technique is so much higher, you actually don't need to run as many different cross-validation or validation techniques because you're validating an idea at a large scale. The other issue with some qualitative techniques is that you might miss out on certain segments that the large scale techniques reveal to you. And although this is theoretical, the idea is that you as a product manager have a choice for your risk tolerance. So if you are happy to just use a test with a small group of users and then roll that out to a large group of people, that's fine. It's up to you to flex up and down on this curve based on your relationship with your stakeholders, your tolerance for risk, your buy-in from the business, and your knowledge and experience. You might know that this is the 20th iteration of your page that you've done, and you feel really confident, so you only need a small amount of data to proceed. And so that would be where I'd counsel to have a think as a product manager, what tolerance of risk do you really feel like you're comfortable with? In terms of avoiding a waste producing machine, there's a few recommendations that I'd make in this space. So following a proven discovery and ideation process, stop when you've got a backlog of a few customer problems and start working on the most urgent one as soon as possible. Prioritize problems and ideas correctly and quickly, move on to validating. Avoid validating for the sake of it. When you do validate, iterate smarter and incorporate an experiment mindset into your delivery process or experiment-driven development. As an example, here's a way that you can move through the discovery process where you've looked at your insights very holistically, you've drawn in all of those different types of insights, so you have the opportunity to look for unknown customer problems as well as known ones. You frame up the customer problems for how many users are impacted and the type of issue customers face, and then you create a robust testing backlog or validation backlog of your ideas. Here's an example of about 6 different customer problem areas for a particular website. And you can see here, there are 6. This is way too many for us to deal with. So we decided to limit to just 3. And we actually only worked on 3 customer problems in one instance. And we made sure to stop before going too far and looking at too many different customer problems. Then have a think about how you can prioritize quickly instead of wasting time trying to choose which idea to work on within that customer backlog. So one of the misconceptions is that you should try and collect more ideas, and I'd actually counsel to have a small number of customer problems and a small number of ideas. And the myth here is that you could get a backlog of every single thing that you could test or validate, but actually the truth is that you're not going to deliver them all, and that your priorities are going to change and what you know about the customer is going to change. So the solution really is just to accept that you can't have all ideas in your list before you start working, and know that you will continuously look for new ideas and evidence. So I like to refer to Itamar Galad in this instance because he's got the evidence scores or the acid test of your ideas, and the level of investment in the idea should always stay proportional to the level of confidence in it. So another prioritization myth that I like to counsel people against is to deliver more things. People think that if they deliver more stuff, that it'll be more valuable to the customer. And actually that's not true. It doesn't directly translate into value. It's more important that actually you can deliver less stuff that is genuinely valuable to the customer and create experiments with more variations. So there's some evidence that was done by Optimizely that looked at actually delivering experiments with slightly more variations have a higher win rate. So you're putting more horses into the race, and so you have a higher potential to win. And then also plan around, roadmap around lots of different types of approaches and ideas. Think about different strategic tracks that you might work over, and then also consider the value of your ideas at the same time as the velocity of your product delivery or program. So how quickly can you go, as well as the value of the ideas that you're actually developing. So you're keeping a balance in what you're doing. And then finally, a prioritization framework will save me. And actually the perfect prioritization framework doesn't exist, but using it for the right moment in the right decision is helpful. And so what I actually recommend to do instead is to use the right prioritization process, pre-qualify your ideas, follow that proven discovery process, disregard ideas that are a little bit too small for you to work on or you don't have enough evidence to support them. Yes, this diagram from Iterate is amazing. I really suggest that all different product teams use this so that they can actually drive better insights, be able to choose better ideas, think about the right approach for their experiments. And there isn't a single team that I've used this with who haven't found it useful so far. But one of the issues that you can have is you can spend too long prioritizing, too long thinking about the amount of validation you need to do in order to roll out an idea, like how much discovery really is enough. And Iterate has saved us again by providing a really good summary here. Essentially, the top right quadrant is just opinions. Never launch anything based on what you have that's near to zero levels of evidence to support it. You can sort of release small things based on having assessment set up. If you've got data, which is in the sort of low to medium low, then that's great, but you should only do it for small or low risk, easy to revert changes. Everything else you should validate using some sort of test results, launch results, especially if it's really complicated. But how much validation you need depends on the cost of building the idea in full, how risky it is, and also your risk tolerance. When you do validate, iterate smarter. So this is a nice example from Teresa Torres, where she gives a sort of talk through in her blog of a designer and product manager who both want to launch something. The designer would like to start by designing the whole thing first so that the main MVP can be rolled out with a design that's holistic with all the other features. Whereas actually what Teresa Torres counsels here is just design and test the first bit, the MVP, and then ignore all the other components and features you might need to design and build later. Because if you design them up front, you'll need to redesign them once you've got data from the first iteration of your product. And actually you end up wasting a lot of time in design effort, even if you're not wasting time in production effort. And then that's the summary of the 5 or 6 steps. Use a proven discovery and ideation process. Stop when you've got a decent number of customer problems you need to solve. Prioritize those problems and ideas correctly and quickly and move to validating. Avoid validating for the sake of it. When you do validate, iterate it in a smarter way. And then incorporate an experiment mindset into your delivery process. So with the little bit of time that I've got available, I'm going to talk quickly about EDD. So any of you who come from the experimentation industry, this won't be novel to you at all whatsoever, but what's quite interesting is it's a way of talking about software development in a framework-driven way. It's a conceptual framework that works with Agile, post-Agile framework, and a bit like TDD or BDD, it's a way that you can improve the way you deliver software and features using Agile methodologies. So what's really great about it is you're rolling stuff out as you actually measure the impact of success. And for those of us who've worked in the experimentation industry for a few years, this is what we've always tried to get product teams to get towards, which is actually continuously experimenting and rolling things out as you do it. And ED isn't new. So take a look at these. This is an article about experiment-driven development from 2021, one from a book from 2019 by a guy called Paul Risson, which is fantastic. I absolutely recommend that people get his book, Experiment-Driven Product Development. Asaf Arkin, he developed a E framework built in Ruby called Vanity. And then S. Flieger, Design and Analysis in Software Engineering, is actually an article from 1994, which talks about experiment design within software development. So this isn't like a novel concept. It's been around for years. It's just the way that it's come into popularity is it almost went through marketing teams who were running A/B tests first, and then actually has come back into sort of the core of software development. So ED helps with multiple problems across the software and product lifecycle. So do customers really want this new feature? Do they still use this old feature, or should we get rid of it? Are there things that would genuinely impact the customer and be doing good for the business? Should this product even still exist? Should it be sunset and be replaced by something else? And it helps us avoid this waste producing machine. It takes us beyond just discovering customer problems, but actually validating the solution as we're implementing it. So what are the benefits of EDDs, particularly for engineers? It's compatible with other frameworks, and many engineers already use TDD and EDD together. It creates features with minimum coding effort to put something out there and to validate it. You don't have to over-engineer for all the just-in-case scenarios because you're going to roll it back. And if in 6 months' time the market changes and you need to dump features you no longer need, you can be grateful you didn't overdevelop them. And the caveat is, to make all that happen, the code has to be easy to change, easy to troubleshoot, and reliable enough to continuously deploy. So one of the things is that you do need the ability to roll out code and roll it back quite easily in order for this to apply, but it definitely works in all different scenarios, even ones where you don't have easy development process. ED in its simplest form really is experiment-driven development. So the process of creating a hypothesis, which you've already done when you've done your discovery process, designing an experiment, so you're actually fleshing out all the different variants and parts of your experiment. You're putting in place all the things that you need to do in order to validate it effectively, and you're sample sizing, you're making sure that the experiment is shaped and has the right kind of analytics in place as well. You deploy and run your experiment, you wait for the analysis to come in, and then you finally run with your best option. And the idea is that you repeat that process until well, forever, really. So how to enable ED in your business. So having a framework isn't enough, you need to enable it. So the core of what you're trying to achieve is making the business successful. In order for the business to be successful, you want team goals to be impacted and your team to be successful and healthy. To do that, you have to work across these 6 different areas to make sure that measurement is deployed correctly within your business. You need to have the right kind of technology, you need to have the right kind of skills and training, analysis, ideation, experiment design, and execution. And I've given some examples of what these mean here. So skills and training means, do people actually understand what they need to do? Do they have the right skills to be able to measure, to use your product analytics tool, to be able to run an A/B test, to do user research? Are they analyzing results in the right way? Ideation, are you coming up with good ideas and are they impacting your goal? Are you picking the right sort of experiments, and are you executing your experiments in the right sort of way? So that's actually the end of my session, and I've given the session synopsis here. So basically, discovery is not an end in itself. Without a low-risk way of validating your solutions, the pressure to find the perfect idea by doing more discovery mounts. The first idea you might work on might not be the best one, but working on it gets you closer to the best idea possible. We need to learn to walk the fine line between enough scrutiny and actually choosing to make enough mistakes that you learn how to do experimentation, how to do a sort of build, measure, learn process, and move that on so that you're actually working in the right direction. And actually just becoming habitual. Not everything has to be good all the time. It's about the habit of asking the question, did we measure that? Did we run an experiment? Did we validate it? Did we do some user research? That sort of thing. Thank you for listening.
That's awesome. Thanks, Ellie. Appreciate it. I know that's a bit of a whirlwind tour. We're just going to open up some time here for Q&A. If you want to pop your questions in the Q&A section, we'd be happy to have Ellie take some time to answer those for you. Maybe Ellie, I'm just going to maybe get started here with one, why we wait to see what other people have, but thinking about the teams that you're encountering or the teams that you're working with or that you've seen, what's been the biggest challenge point in actually just getting started with the right best practices?
So if I understand the question, what's the right starting point for teams?
In the construct of your stuff today, you showed a lot of teams that might just start doing delivery and execute all the way through to the end. Are there a lot of teams doing that kind of work? Is it that some teams are doing a little bit of early discovery work, but skipping a lot of the validation? Is it maybe that they're doing the validation, but skipping the discovery?
I think it kind of depends on the maturity. Yeah, right. It depends on the maturity of the business. a client I've been working with recently, they haven't run their first experiment yet because their A/B testing tool isn't working. But what they have asked for us to do is to come in and talk to them about how do we get started and how we choose the right idea. And it's forcing them to actually think quite deeply about what customer problems they do want to solve, because they can't actually, they're chomping at the bit to get in the tool, but they can't. That example I gave of those 6 customer problems from this session, that was from that group. And they are delivering stuff onto the front end of their site, but they're in a stage of their maturity where they don't have like our modern conception of product squads and product delivery. They kind of have project teams and they build big projects. And what I was trying to inject for them was almost that kind of iteration. How can you iterate a little tiny bit? What's the smallest thing you could do today to test the idea before you actually go away and build a 3-month project trying to deliver it? So that's at one end of the spectrum. I would say actually at the other end of the spectrum, you've got really good product managers who are really clever and have read everything on like the Silicon Valley Product Group website, and they're so clever, but they're lost in the theory of product, and so they're not actually putting it into practice in their work. And as a little bit of insight here, one of the reasons why I did some work for Product Board at the end of last year was that for certain product teams, there was a bit of a problem where they'd spend like 8 weeks trying to discover a problem that they knew already needed to be solved, like adding a certain kind of authentication on the login screen or enabling certain things to happen in a certain order, when it's Jira have already solved this problem and we know that it works in this particular way. There's no other way you can really do this and still be compliant. So this isn't a problem we need to do 8 weeks of discovery. It's actually something that we know about. So let's limit this kind of discovery that we're doing and actually focus on choosing a particular solution and validating that solution and making sure that it works. Or if it's something like regulatory changes you have to make, that you're not breaking the customer experience or making it really difficult for customers to convert or to use the site. So I would say those are kind of the 2 opposite ends of the spectrum, is getting lost in too much discovery versus not knowing where to start at all. And a lot of clients I work with as well also say, I don't know what experimentation tool to pick. I don't even know how to pick a tool. I don't know what's important. Is it just cost? That's another stumbling block that I'm finding some teams are experiencing, particularly on the less mature end of the spectrum. But yeah, there's more examples out there. I'm sure there's plenty of people on the call who've been in product organizations that have had far worse problems than the ones I've just listed.
So a question from John is, what's the best way to implement Edmar Galad's confidence score? How do you get a team to actually consider their confidence in this particular way?
I normally print it out on A3 and stick it above the desk of the product manager for that product team. And I stick one above my own desk as well. And every time someone comes and talks to me, I just point at it and say, have you scored the idea using this? If you haven't, go away and do it, and then you come back and talk to me. I'm not really that strict, but I do try and remind people to use it every single time. But I think if you can do it practically and tangibly with the team. So there's another tool I use called an experiment canvas, where I get the team to lay out all the different components of their experiment, and I ask them to score the evidence and to write out what evidence they had for their idea, so that then when they come back to it in like 4 months' time, I go, oh, where did that idea come from? Oh yeah, it came from user research. I know where it came from. And it might not seem important to the team when you're asking them to do it in the moment, but actually it's quite quick once they've got used to doing it for a few different ideas. If you've got a Google sheet that's full of hundreds of ideas, don't do it in that kind of rice ice prioritization sort of way. It's very abstract then, and it doesn't feel like you're connected to the idea. Whereas actually the best time to do it is when you've just been looking at some customer problem evidence and ask them, oh, how strong do you feel that evidence is for that idea? So that would be my answer for that.
If users say they would like to use a product, but they don't, how much marketing spend could be used to validate?
Could is an interesting word there, because I should. I mean, in an ideal world, you would use none. I guess it depends what you're suggesting in terms of marketing spend. If you're thinking about running a marketing campaign that will drive users to your product in a particular way, I think it's actually a deeper issue. So before you get to the point of marketing spend, I worry if customers don't want to use the product, then you've picked to work on a product that has poor market fit. So maybe you need to go back to analyzing what customer problem is product solving, and actually how well has it got a fit for the market that you're looking at launching the product into. And it might be that you're launching a product that people would use, but you're actually a bit far ahead of the curve and you're launching something that only really early adopters would look at using. And actually most people are not ready to use that particular product yet. There's a really good example on Itamar Galad's website where he talks about how to analyze two features against each other, where anecdotal evidence says that people will use a product and it sounds really cool. It's like involving using AI to do something like a chatbot. And then the other one is a dashboard, which no one's really indicated that they're interested in, but there is some evidence that it would be a good idea. And he shows how you can go out and compare the two ideas against each other. And although the chatbot one sounds cool, in the end, the dashboard wins, because once they start rolling it out, real users start using it and the adoption's really high. So I think that's another thing that you can do, is before you get to the point of how much marketing spend should I put on my new app or my new launch product. I can see someone's put there in the comments, would Kano help with this kind of context? And I think you could use Kano modeling in terms of the customer delight and how much you're actually measuring the customer delight. And I think that's a good one to think about. But yeah, I really would drill down into how much research on your market have you done? Because I think marketing ultimately should have fed into that in the first place. If you've got people in your marketing team who know your customer and know your market, actually they should have fed into that process in the first place. And so it's really, if they haven't, that's bad, but also it's up to them to spend that money to get that new product launched. If that message has come from down on high, let's get this launched, then how much spend could be used, as much as marketing are willing to pay for it if they believe in the idea, would be my answer, really. That wasn't a very good answer, I don't think.
No, I think it's good. I think part of this too is there's so many subtleties and all of these things organizationally, as you talked about, like stakeholders and the different dimensions, but also how much work has been done, how thorough is that work? Was there actually discovery undertaken? Was it just the idea that was thrown out there? Yeah, many different dimensions essentially that can inform that. I want to leave some other space for anybody else that has questions before we wrap things up. Maybe I'll ask another question here, Ellie, and that's maybe coming back to the ED side of your presentation today. You talked about that sort of experimentation-driven culture and also the tool set underneath that to support it from an engineering perspective. What's a team to do if maybe they're not maybe at the level of awareness of these kinds of methodologies? What's their best place to get started?
I think the best thing you can do is always think about the type of organization you're in first, and then see where you can fit in some of these techniques in a small way. I work with a range of clients, some of whom are massive enterprise organizations. It takes them months to decide to do something and then months to implement it. And they can't work in that lean, agile way that you expect from a company like a tech-first business like Uber or Delivery, where their whole stack is on the cloud and it's really easy for them to change things, and they've got a smaller organization so they can be more nimble. But if you are in one of those sort of bigger organizations where you are trying to introduce a small amount of innovative thinking or iterative thinking, you can build in little tiny things, even if it's just asking a question in a regular meeting that you hold with the other project or product managers. Did we measure this? What was the pre-post analysis on this? Have we tagged this? You can ask the question, even if you don't get an answer. But there's other little things you can do, which is maybe you can run internal surveys. If a new feature is being launched and you've got a large enterprise company, why not roll it out internally first and get internal users using it first, or send a survey out internally and say, look, we're about to launch this. Could you feedback on how this is working? So you might not be doing full external surveys with customers because maybe you can't. Maybe you work in a financial services industry where it's really difficult to reach out to customers without working out your opt-in, opt-out from a contact perspective. But I think there's little things that you can introduce into your sort of daily, weekly process that make it slightly more iterative. However, there's always that jarring feeling of, if you're someone who wants to work in a really agile way and you are in one of those more slightly stationary enterprise organizations, that jarring feeling is never going to completely go away until you've got a top-down sponsor for what you're doing. And so the hope you would have is either a top-down sponsor comes along who creates that deeper change in the organization and can follow that framework that I've suggested, or Maybe you need to go and work at a more agile, nimble organization who does embrace that slightly more tech-first approach to what they're doing. Yeah, that was another it depends type answers, I'm afraid.
Yeah, that's okay. I don't think there's a perfect answer to that question. It's a bit loaded. In your answer, what I heard is we have to try the small incremental things to start to build inertia towards the behaviors and the methodologies that we, in the end, want to see. And the best way we can do that is by bringing it up as part of our ongoing interactions as a team and using that to start building a bit of that culture.
Yes. I think as well, if you're maybe a team lead, so you're at that mid-level, if you have that mindset with your team, it will start to have momentum as well. So if you find that your team are able to work in a slightly more innovative way, that's a bit more experimental, even if it's not fully, it will get a bit, people start to ask, why do they work in a different way to us? And why does it sound more interesting? And you might find that it spreads in an infectious way. One negative thing that sometimes happens in those larger organizations is people go and set up an innovation team like all the way over here by itself. And then it gets like zero traction on any of the initiatives that it tries to do because it's just so divorced from the processes in the rest of the business. And one of the clients I was working with recently, who was a financial services client, was just like that. They had an innovation team over here that was doing a super futuristic 3-year out stuff that was completely off the real estate of the brand. And then over here, you've got product teams who are just trying to trawl their way through a backlog of stuff that they just have to do that's completely not prioritized with evidence or data. They've never even used build, measure, learn. And these two things are existing in the same organization at the same time. So yeah, that's a bit of a challenge.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's it for questions at the moment. We'll wrap things up then today. I just shared a link out to our post-event survey. If you want to share your feedback on today's event, we'd love to hear it. We do share this with our speakers, and it's also very valuable for our team here as well. If you want to continue the conversation, Ellie is part of our community. You continue that in our Slack community. And we have lots of different events coming up. This week, we have Priya Bacha coming in, talk about experimentation on Thursday. James Jordan next week, talking about how to find that job in product management, given the macroeconomic environment. We've got a roundtable, and we also have Jordan Bergstrom next week as well. And if you do want to speak or share some of your wisdom or knowledge like Ellie has with us here today, we're always happy to have you. You can find out more at productmakers.com. Thanks very much, Ellie, for joining us. And thank you, everybody, for taking the time out of your busy days to join us as well. Take care.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.